Hi, my name is Jim Egan. I am the curator of the Newport Tower Museum in Newport, Rhode Island. And I've written 20 books and studied for about 40 years this enigmatic stone tower that is just across the street from the museum. It's 28 feet tall and it's 24 feet in diameter. And my theory is that this was built by the Elizabethans in the year 1583, and I've written an entire book about it called Elizabethan America, the John D. Tower 1583, but I'm not here to discuss that today, because I'm here to discuss the various theories about who built the tower. And now, there are several theories: the Vikings, the Templars, the Chinese, the Portuguese, but one of the main theories is that the first governor of Rhode Island talks about this in his 1677 will, and he calls it my stone-built windmill. Well, it really doesn't look much like a windmill. First off, if you had all windmills at the time were made out of wood, and they usually had a turret that had to face the blades continuously towards the wind. And so this would have a 24-foot turret on it. It would be so large you wouldn't be able to move it from the ground or even inside. And then if there's a horizontal shaft that goes to a vertical shaft and the two grindstones grind the grain, all your grain's going to blow away. Why would you have an open arcade on a windmill? And also inside, if you had the beams, if you had these grindstones on the first floor, that puts them about 8 feet away from a fireplace. And the last thing you put in a windmill is a fireplace, because one little spark, boom, the whole thing blows up. So one of the main reasons that people think this is a fireplace has to do with an excavation that was done in 1950 by William Godfrey. And he was a graduate, he was earning his PhD from Harvard University, and he took on as a project trying to figure out the tower. So they were able to do a dig, and he found over 20,000 colonial artifacts, because this was right in the middle of town, was well used for many years. But his conclusion was that this was a rather peculiar, anachronistic tower owned by the first governor, Governor Arnold, situated on the highest point of land. And he says it's a summer house, or a folly, a form of architecture which soon became very popular. And then he says the tower was probably built as a comfortable retreat and lookout for a very rich and very autocratic old man. So he doesn't say that it's a windmill, but in his report, he said because the tower was talked about in several deeds here in Newport, that it's called the Old Stone Mill. And also the second thing is that they found three fragments of millstones in the tower, right in the center part of the tower, under the dirt when they did their excavation. So he said, well, after this guy built it as a retreat, because he obviously didn't build it as a windmill, maybe it was converted into a windmill. Well, over the years, people have glommed onto that, and that's why it's called the Old Stone Mill. And that became one of the main theories, because nobody really had studied the history of the mill and even knew about this Elizabethan colonization effort. So recently, they had an exhibit was put on at the Newport Historical Society Museum in Washington Square, in which they talk about the various theories. And they talk about Elizabethans, Templar, all of them. It was a very fair exhibit, but at the very end they say, we think that it's a stone mill because of the millstones that they found there. And they showed the millstone, one of the millstones there. And I looked at the millstone and I'm like, that doesn't look like a millstone to me. It's a stone about the size of a brick, but it's all in different shapes, and it's not a squared off rectangular brick, but it's about that size. And it does have these grooves in it, but the grooves are rounded, and in millstones, the grooves are usually straight, and they're usually, and there's always a smooth surface. This was not a smooth surface. It didn't show any rounded edge for the millstone or anything. So I'm like, I'm no millstone expert. So I said, let me call an expert. So I called Paul Drum, and he is the owner of Kenyon's Grist Mill in Usquepaugh, Rhode Island. And his business, grinding cornmeal and Johnny cake mix and all sorts of flour, has been in business since 1696. It's the oldest manufacturer in all of Rhode Island. And so he said, well, I'm going to bring along a geologist friend of mine who I went to University of Rhode Island with and studied geology. His name is Frank Posna. And so P-O-S-T-M-A. He's a trained geologist and works in the field. And so they came up, and we went up to the Historical Society, and Bridget Newton was nice enough, she's the archivist, to bring out these two of the fragments, and we had to wear blue gloves so that we didn't touch it or anything, and they examined it, and I said to them afterwards, I'm like, well, what do you think? And he said, these are drill marks from a star drill. In other words, when you cut apart a piece of stone, in olden days, what they would do is drill in with these hammers and chisels that have a star tip on the end of it, and it would drill right down into it. And then they would either fill them with water and wait for them to freeze, and then it would break open the stone, or they would put in wedges and then hit it, and along that line it would break. He says, that's what this is. This isn't a grindstone. This doesn't. In fact, the material it's not like a sedimentary rock that's able to be very smooth. It's very rough granite, and it didn't even have a. So anyway, they looked at it, and I said, well, on a scale of 1 to 100, what do you think? Do you think it could be a millstone? And Frank said about 3%, and then Paul said about 0. He just really didn't think it was a millstone at all, which is what I had suspected. And so, as I mentioned, the reason that they call it a millstone is two things. One, the first governor of Rhode Island talks about it at my stone-built windmill, and around his will, when you see the original of it, which is at the John Carter Brown Library in Providence, you'll notice that here there's 5 asterisks. I've circled them here, but an asterisk back then did not refer to anything in the margin. There is nothing in the margins, and they're the only asterisks in the entire 12-page will. And back then, they meant an omission. I'm leaving something out. Well, he didn't want to say who owned the mill, because then this other party would be able to claim it, the Elizabethans or the people who had paid for it and had it built in what I claim was 1583. So after we examined the 2 fragments at the museum, we weren't allowed to do any videotaping there, which I totally understand. But they said we could videotape down at the Historical Society Museum. So we walked down the hill through Washington Square and up on the 2nd floor at the museum. We saw the piece there, so we examined it, we read the whole thing over, and here's what the 2 experts had to say. So tell me who your name is and what you think of this artifact.
Sure. Frank Postma, trained as a geologist. We're looking at a stone that was recovered from the Newport mill. It's definitely a granite, got a high biotite content to it, meaning it's going to have a lot of facets to the planes of the stone. Biotite's a very soft mineral. You can see there's a lot of that's been plucked out of these flat sides as it's weathered, but it doesn't bear any resemblance to a millstone.
So what do the grooves remind you of?
The grooves, it look like it's been split with a star.
Still going.
Yep, with a star chisel or some other mechanism to give you a flat side to it. We also saw some polishing on that side, so possible explanation is this was a stone that was used to polish another stone. Okay.
But out of a chance of 1 to 100, what percentage do you think that might be a millstone?
You're looking at about 3%.
About 3%, yeah. Just because it could be. Yeah. Oh, we've got another authority here. This is Paul. So tell us your name.
Hi there.
Yeah.
Paul Drum from Kenyon's Grist Mill. How are
yes.
you?
And he's an expert on millstones because he grinds them and such. So take a look at there, and you tell me what you think of this stone.
I honestly believe this is a scrap portion from working stone. I don't believe it had anything to do with a millstone. The size, the shape, it's a fragment to begin with. It doesn't appear that the patterns that present themselves or the dress that presents itself on this stone would have any similarity to any dress that I've seen. And the small size and the irregular shape of it is not something that would be included in a larger stone and a heavy weight.
And we were just up at the Historical Society and we saw 2 similar pieces that were found in 1950 also in the excavation. What did you think of those?
They're probably rubble.
Probably rubble. It's not a stone.
That's my guess.
And this is an expert who grinds stones and works with grindstones. How often do you have to refinish your stone?
We rework or sharpen or peck our stones about once a year.
Yep.
They're happen to be made from Wesley granite, which is a different variety of granite than we have here.
Yeah.
But it's a very sturdy variety, and it will last for 26 to 28 tons of grain going through grinding before it needs to be resurfaced and roughed up again.
Yeah.
Basically.
And do the grooves that you make look anything like those?
No, the ones on our stones are sort of atypical anyway.
Yeah.
They're cyclical shape, which
Yeah.
it came much later in the development of millstones. But even the beginning, in the ancient millstones that date back to the ones I've seen patterns of from the 1300s, whatever, they're very linear. They usually have a master that comes from the center and to the outside edge of the stone. Master, journeyman, apprentice, butterfly, all different names for them.
Uh-huh.
And they work together with a bold edge, and as they pass the corresponding stone, the top bottom,
Yeah.
the bold edges work together. They chop and actually cut the grain before they're finished off on a
Like
small paper.
like scissors cut.
Almost like a scissor cut.
Yeah.
You know, that work against each other.
Yeah. Whereas this are just a couple of round grooves that look like they were made by a star drill or
If
something.
you were to make a millstone with pattern that was somewhat similar to that,
Yeah.
they would radiate from the center, and that could probably do nothing more than maybe crack some grain.
Right.
You know, you'd have like for chicken feed or something, but that I don't see that. Even the ones that I have that were given to me from Bristol area,
Yeah.
they're not that old. They're not ancient stones. They're not from the 1300s or something. Somebody hewn them,
Yeah.
and the grooves are coarse like that, but they're straight edges
Yeah.
with appendages off them. They're deep, similar to that, but they do have a shape to the groove.
Yeah.
And the stones are quite big and they're thick and they're finished.
From the like
This is-
1700s? Or?
I would say probably 1800s.
1800s,
is probably
yeah.
when that one was made, and a lot of farms would commonly have those just to crack feed for their chickens.
Right.
You know, that sort of thing. So you kind of look and see what you can find. You know,
Yeah.
but I think this didn't have anything to do with a millstone. To be honest with you, it's such a small fragment. So.
Yeah, and also, if you're gonna have a really crude millstone or something, why would you build a 28-foot tall stone and mortar tower on 8 pillars to have the whole thing work?
You're right, exactly.
And plus, if you were grinding stone, all your grain would blow away. You got an open arcade.
Yeah,
why would you
right.
have that? It doesn't. The whole thing's
So I was
inconsistent.
just looking at here to see where the finished product would come. Because if you're looking at this, you've got your gearing, which is typical, but you'd want the tower would actually have to swivel and circle around.
Yeah.
And then you've got, this typical.
You'd have to have a turret, and this doesn't show a turret necessarily.
And you don't want to put it in one direction because then you can't stop the mill. If you put it
Right.
facing,
The wind
30
shifts.
degrees off the wind, and it's going to keep running, and you can't shut it down. You
Right.
know, I mean, you need to be able to turn it directly into the wind to shut it down. Then it comes down. Here's your stone depiction here. I'm curious what these are. I mean, these are.
That's the fireplace.
Well, yeah, it's possible.
But would you put a fireplace 8 feet away from the stone?
It's probably not smart. You know?
The whole thing explodes,
They
right?
usually put it in another room,
Yeah.
and then the meal obviously needs to go somewhere. And I don't know what they're supposing was down here. Why would you build it that far off the ground?
Right.
You know,
And
why
you
wouldn't
gotta
you have
climb
the
a ladder.
shaft be longer to come down and finish here? You go to any windmill, this millstone is on the basement floor.
Right.
It's a very low, and they use the longer shaft.
Right.
So.
The whole thing is sort of inconsistent. This is somebody's drawing of what
Yeah.
it might have been. They're kind of dreaming about it. But I had some designers came up. These are engineers, and they said the torque on a windmill would take this thing and twist it right off. The eight legs of it, the torque would go, and all the legs would just go boom, 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 boom. It would fall, right?
Very well. Yeah. I mean, there's quite a bit of torque. I mean, when you go to, I'm sure you've been down to the one down here in the Prescott Mill,
Yes.
and that's a neat one.
Yeah.
It grinds pretty well.
Yeah.
The one in Jamestown also grinds well.
Yeah.
And it's about being able to move that turret. I mean, you got to be able to spin it.
Right.
And because I don't believe, I know that my dad grew up around the one which was the, it was in the corner of Mill Lane and West Main Road, the Boyd's Mill.
Boyd's Mill, yep,
Boyd's Mill,
I know
and
that,
they
yep.
moved that one.
Yep.
And that, I guess, from what I understanding now, it's the only existing 8-bladed windmill in the country.
Oh, really? Yeah, it still operates once a year. They
Still
run it up.
operates or
Yeah,
whatever, and there's a gentleman, I forget his name, who was millwright, who did the work on that one.
Yeah.
Did the work in Jamestown, and he also worked on the Gilbert Stewart grist mill as well. And he's a pretty sharp tack. He's got it down.
on the wood or on the stones?
On the wood.
Yeah, I see, for
I
constructing.
don't know what he knows about the stones, but I know that my dad got a phone call from the Prescott Mill.
Yeah.
This is back in, probably the early 70s, I think, early to mid 70s, and he got a call, and they wanted to get some grain from him because
Yeah.
they wanted to grind in the mill. And my dad said, well, we've been grinding with it now. He said, well, what are you grinding?
Yeah.
And he said, nothing, we're just spinning it. And my dad said, oh my God, because you just stone to stone, not a good thing, you know? And
Nothing there, yeah.
My dad gave him some corn and went down
Just
and
for
showed him
something.
how to operate.
Grease
you
it,
know,
yeah.
something, yeah. You just got to have something there, you know?